Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Joshua. I'm going to be your presenter today. So under special functions at the top, in the top center, you'll see also the option called dashboard. So if you kind of look at the top of our dashboard here, it says accounting dashboard in the upper left. You've got the accounting weekly balance, the fund receipts, disbursements. You can kind of see the floating help message maybe coming up on each of those. But just to the right of those, you see the little blue and white. That's a slide bar. So basically, if you don't want to see or use the weekly account balance, you can turn off that report. Okay? So you see how it's gone from blue to the little gray? We're saying we don't want to see that report. I don't use it. I don't want to see it. So you can basically turn off these reports at will. Okay? And you can essentially just click the little slide bar and turn them back on if you wish. Okay? It's all a matter of what reports you find suitable. Okay? And again, so to the right of that, further, once you can leave them all on if you want. And again, you can turn them off at will if you wish. But it will remember your selections. So if I disable the report, if I recall correctly, and if I close out of my dashboard and relaunch it again, yeah, see the account weekly balance report is still disabled. So it will remember based on your logon the selections that you make for this report, okay, or for this page. At the bottom of page 25, it talks about to revert to the default layout. In what we're talking about here is in the upper right corner where it says colors and reset to default layout. So if I click reset to default layout, notice it re-enables the account weekly balance report. So it just resets it back to what Church Window's default setting would be for the dashboard, okay? You can also change the colors for these. So we notice that we've got a default layout here. So if I click the little down arrow, notice down here we've got a little check mark next to the one labeled default. So that's the default one that Church Windows wants to post it as. And we notice here it's typically in this case for the two-part graphs where there are two parts of it. It's typically going to be something like red and blue. Under something like the income versus expense, it's going to include a variety of colors on that. But you can change this to any option that's in this list if you prefer different colors, okay? So right here, if I say switch it to yellow and green, so if I change that, we now notice that these different reports change, albeit I'm going to admit that I think when I was working on preparing this for this event today, the budget versus actual is not changing. I'm unsure if that's a bug. I'm trying to find that out. But what logic says is that, the income and expense would also change to green and yellow somewhere here. So we might be looking at a bug in the software. And if it is, we'll certainly get it fixed. Okay. But I found no way to be able to override that, and I'll probably have to get my developers involved in getting that, unless they have a reason why this particular report is not able to change that color. So we still see the income and expense still shows the blue and red here, sorry, on the upper right. But all the others are. But even the income expense report versus expense down at the bottom is changing to those yellow and green kind of hues and colors per our request. So if I again do my reset defaults, it still leaves the color. If I want to rechange the color, I've got to go back down and reselect back to default if I want that to change. Okay. And that's detailed on page 25 and 26. But we're not kind of getting into the actual heart of the reports just yet. So let's talk about some of these reports in detail. So the account weekly balance report is this one, right? It says account weekly balance in the upper left, but on the actual bar it says account balance, okay? Well, typically if you come into this window, it's going to show nothing under the account. But you see here in the upper left, you got the menu called account. You can literally pick any account from this list. Any account in your chart of accounts is going to appear here, whether it's accounts receivable clients or asset accounts, accounts payable vendors, liabilities, funds, income, those are the accounts that it's going to allow us to choose, not income and expenses, sorry. So let's choose our main checking account. So here we choose Huntington Bank Checking, and we've now got it to the right. We've got the two formats, the weekly format or the monthly, okay? Basically, it's a line graph of the balance of a specific account from the beginning of the year through the current date, okay, the current date on your computer. So in this case, it would be through May 10th. So in this case, we've got weekly selected. So it does show, January 7th through the 14th to the 21st, 28th, 4th, February 11th, etc. Okay, and it's across the screen horizontally. Okay, and if you can kind of notice, if we're hovering over each of these, it does show based on the particular date, individual date in between these, where it shows the actual balance on that. So depending on the format you're choosing, and if we change it to monthly, we notice it kind of becomes a little bit more of a straight line as opposed to kind of a staggered line because the intervals are more broad. So it will it is going to change to how that looks depending on whether you choose monthly or weekly. But let's go back to weekly. And so when we choose, say, our checking balance and we go to print, it opens up and says, hey, is the Times New Roman okay? It's going to default to landscape, but if you want to try it in portrait, you can. But in this case, this report is probably better suited in landscape. But then when we click print, boom, it brings it up and it shows, the lowest amount up to the highest amount. I mean, and if it was higher, it would break it down into whatever the top dollar amount was. Now, I don't know how it would it change the increments from 20,000 to something different? Probably if it was, if you had extremes, highs and lows on there, it probably would auto adjust those amounts automatically. But then it does show our dates across the bottom. Okay. Similar, if we go back to this, say, monthly report and click print, it's basically going to print virtually exactly what we're seeing on the screen in front of us. Okay. So I'm seeing here a question that says, can you choose multiple accounts that are part of a fund in the account balance graph? Is that the one we're talking about? Unfortunately, the answer to that, Carolyn, is no. In this case, it only allows us to choose one account at any given time. And again, what this does is it shows the account in specifically we're choosing. So we choose general operating fund. In this case, when we choose the general operating fund, notice it is showing just the fund balance. It's because this is the net activity of the income into the fund and the expenses that we're paying out. In this case, we've been spending more money out of the general fund throughout the course of the year than we've been putting back into it. But this does not show us any income and expense accounts whatsoever. Let's try weekly and see if that changes. Yeah, so it does change drastically when we choose still declines throughout the course of the year, expenses exceeding income, but it does show kind of a more, staggered effect on the general fund when we choose that, okay? All right, so weekly account balance, perfect, we're good on that. Again, folks, part of what we're trying to be able to have you do here is make you aware that these reports are available and that you need to explore them, okay? Next one is our budget versus actual graph, and we're talking about the report here. Let me kind of disable some of these reports. And so we're talking about, well, no, let's leave it on. The one in the upper right labeled budget versus actual. So basically there's two radio buttons we see here in the upper right. It basically compares your income budgets and your expenses to the actual income and expenses, monies that you've brought in, income and expensed out in the form of expenses. So by default, it defaults to the all budget items. So it just basically, and these are two separate reports I want to point out. To the right of the income, it says print. To the right of the expense, it says print. So these are not one report, but two, okay? One for income, one for expenses. So then if we choose all budgeted line items and click print next to income, again, print graph options, and we click print, and it actually says we're at 21.4% of our actual income budget that we've entered. So we brought in $69,325 of income, and we actually had budgeted $325,874. Okay. Again, when we go to the expense and click print, it's basically showing you the same information on the screen as you're seeing on the screen. Okay. Specific budget item, and this does allow us to enter a date range. So if I did want to maybe get a bigger picture, like maybe I might want to run this through December 31st. So we notice in this case things changed a little bit with regards to our expenses, but our income remains largely unchanged. We only have partial data, folks, entered here under our training data, not a full year. But you can choose specific budget items. The key thing to keep in mind is this budget versus actual report is only going to display or allow you to choose budgeted income and expense accounts only. If the account income or expense is not budgeted, it is not in this list. So we notice here under our specific budget items and we click under income budget, we only have 4 income accounts: general ties and offerings, flower income, rental income. Those are the only income accounts that we have budgeted. Under expenses, it's probably going to be a more extensive list, but only budgeted expenses, no non-budgeted accounts appear here. Well, why? Because, again, if this is comparing budget to actual, why would we want to see accounts that aren't budgeted in this list? Again, play with this, folks, okay? You can always reset it back to the defaults, and, you don't know what you can present to folks until you show them, okay? All right. Page 28 talks about the budget versus actual graph options, about either the all budgeted line items or specific, and it kind of shows you how to go through those reports that way into page 29, kind of basically what I went through, including changing of the date range and then printing those out. Again, it's essentially just not quite, I guess, pie graphs, I guess is what I would call those. Graph, they're not the actual pies themselves, are a little bit different. Fund receipts, disbursements. I'm having to kind of move along here, folks. We're getting short on time. I want to get through some of this, the rest of this if possible. It is literally a summary of the activity of our funds on our balance sheet. So if I choose nothing here, it's going to run it through from January 1 through May 10th, and I click print. It's going to simply show, we notice here blue is the line is the receipts or income, and red is the disbursements or expenses. And when I click print and print again, it shows me how, in this case, general operating fund, here's my income for the year, here's how much I've spent. Building fund, income versus expense, education building fund, etc. Okay? So again, it is in literally one line, one column, how each funds is affected by their associated income and expense totals, okay? Again, it's kind of similar to our fund activity report, but in a nice kind of bar graph, okay? There is also an option to the right that says you can edit the date range, of course, so if you want to do it for a quarter or a half year or the full year, you can certainly do that. To the right, we have an option called ledgers, so if you have main funds with sub funds, it allows you to choose that. We have one called, our memorials are set up as a ledger with sub accounts. So we choose that, and we notice here's our main memorial fund. When I click print again, it shows each one of my sub memorial funds. It looks like John Joseph has the bulk of the income. These others have a balance but remain unchanged. So again, it will allow you to choose a main ledger fund with sub funds to see what those sub fund activity is as well. Okay. Can you change the year from here? I'm being asked. I'm sorry, Carolyn, the answer is no. If I wanted to run this for a different year, I would have to change my accounting year back to the other year to run that. Good question. All right, with a couple minutes left, we want to go to our income versus expense. Sorry, folks, let me take a quick look here at these other ones to see if there's something that I missed. Income and expense, income versus expense graph on page 33. Basically, this graph looks at selected fund and then displays the income versus expense, or just income or just expenses for that fund. So notice here in the middle, we've got a fund menu, okay, which again, it details all of your funds. No other accounts, no assets, liabilities, income or expenses, just funds, okay? I like the general fund because it has the most income and the most expenses. But if we were to choose something like our building fund, it doesn't have any data. Well, because I haven't chosen anything. So just let's see if we can find something that's got some other activity. Well, the general fund is it, folks. So income versus expense, I choose my general fund. Income versus expense, it shows blue income, red expense, okay? I can choose any fund for that, or I can choose just income. So here's my income to my general fund. So most of it's come in through general ties and offerings, but some flower income. But here's where we're going to kind of see some differences on here is when we choose, say, expense. So here's how the expense breakdown occurs for my general fund. I've got a lot of expenses. On the right, it shows a legend with all of the expenses and their totals. Okay. Notice we've got an option that says labels outside. So if I do it with labels inside and click print, it does kind of break it down pretty nicely until I get down to the bottom down here where it gets a little bit convoluted under these other sections where maybe we want to put the labels on the outside, maybe make it a little more easy for folks to comprehend. And then we click print. Yeah, that makes that certainly a lot more clear. And it shows our general fund, operating fund balance expenses. So you would need, if we wanted to show folks, hey, here's what our general fund income was versus our expenses in detail, you might need to print two separate reports with regards to that, okay? Let me take a quick look through this. Folks, you've got to play with these, okay? Again, with our general fund, if I choose just income versus expense, it's a really simple report in the sense that it's, here's my income total, doesn't break it down by account. Here's my summary of expenses with regards to that. Again, I've chosen labels outside. I can choose labels inside, and it just changes that. But it doesn't break down the actual specific accounts. It's a summary, okay? If you want the breakdown, you've got to choose either the income or the expense separately with regards to that.